I am Quinn Sato, and I am sitting in the cab of a Kenworth with the engine off, watching my own breath fog the windshield and disappear. The highway outside Fairbanks is jammed in both directions, not from snow, not from a wreck, but from people who stopped trusting anything that came after the first alerts. A pickup is abandoned sideways across the lane with the door still open. A sedan has its trunk popped, empty, and the owner is nowhere in sight. A guy in a reflective vest is walking down the line of vehicles, peeking into windows, tapping on glass, trying to find someone willing to share fuel. Nobody answers him. I keep my hands low on the wheel and do not move, because movement draws attention. It did not feel real at first. It felt like one more winter scare, one more rumor that would settle down when the radios caught up. Then the phone alerts started coming with broken sentences and no follow-up. Then the first sirens in town ran hard for a while and stopped in a way that did not fit any normal pattern. I heard gunshots in the distance, spaced out, then closer, then a long, ugly run of them that made people start sprinting across the shoulder. A woman in scrubs ran past my hood with one shoe missing, not looking at anyone, not asking for help. The look on her face was enough to make my foot lift off the brake without thinking. I am a long-haul driver. I live by routes and schedules and weather windows. I know how crowds move, how panic spreads at truck stops when the pumps go down. When the first outbreaks hit, everyone's instinct was south. Anchorage, the parks, any place with more services, more people. That is the problem. More people means more hunger, more desperation, and more infection when something starts tearing through bodies and rules at the same time. I sat there for 5 minutes, watching the line of cars, and I saw a choice nobody else wanted to admit. North is empty, north is cold, north is work, north is fewer hands reaching into your cab. I reached behind the seat for my emergency kit and checked what I had without digging around too much. Jerky, peanut butter, a few cans of stew, 2 gallons of water that had turned slushy, a down jacket, spare gloves, a small tool roll, a flare gun. Not much for a man trying to outlast a collapse, but enough to move. I had half a tank, maybe a little more, and a full set of chains. The Dalton Highway was not where anyone sane wanted to be without support, but support had stopped being a real thing. I keyed the mic on my cab radio and listened. Mostly garbage, a few truckers barking at each other, a scared voice asking where to go. Then a pause, and another voice saying the hospital in town was not taking people anymore. It ended in static. I made the decision in the same way I make decisions in whiteout conditions. I stopped waiting for permission. I turned the key, let the engine catch, and crept onto the shoulder. A couple of drivers leaned out their windows and yelled. One man stepped into my path with his palms up. I did not gun it. I did not try to scare him. I simply kept rolling forward at walking speed, steady, forcing him to decide if his body mattered more than blocking me. He moved at the last second and slapped the side of my cab. His face was red with anger and fear. I did not look back. Getting out of Fairbanks took hours. Every side street had someone trying to redirect traffic, and nobody agreed on a direction. I stayed off the main drag and used my local map memory, cutting through industrial areas where the buildings were dark and the doors were shut. I saw a person in a parka stumble out of an alley and grab another person by the shoulders. The second person shoved him off hard and ran. The first person did not run after him. He moved in a stiff, awkward way, and his head kept snapping toward sound. That was my first close look at what people were turning into. No movie speed, no dramatic roar, just a body running on broken commands, hunting noise and movement. I kept my windows up and my doors locked. Once I hit the start of the Dalton Highway, it felt like stepping away from the world. The traffic thinned fast. Most people were still trying to reach bigger towns, and the ones who did come this way were either working the slope, running from something, or hunting for empty space. I passed a small cluster of vehicles parked awkwardly at the side of the road. A man waved his arms, big motions, too eager. He stood between two cars with their hoods up. I kept my lane and watched his hands. No weapon visible. That did not make him safe. I did not slow down. When I was past, I checked my mirrors and saw 3 more people appear from behind the cars, moving quickly, as if they had been waiting. That was enough proof that my instincts were still working. The road north is not forgiving on a normal day. It becomes a different beast when nobody is maintaining it, and every little problem becomes your problem. I stopped once to take a leak behind my truck, keeping the door cracked so I could get back in fast. The cold hit my face and told me exactly what kind of month it was going to be. Wind with teeth, the smell of diesel and frozen dirt. No birds, no distant traffic hum. Just the sound of my engine and the scrape of my boots. I did not stay outside longer than I had to. At the Yukon River crossing, I found my first real sign that the line south was breaking into chaos. A couple of semis were parked at odd angles near the facilities, and one of them had its driver's side door hanging open. There was a smear of something dark along the step, half frozen, and no driver in sight. I did not go looking. I used the pumps only after I walked the area with the flare gun in my hand and my eyes scanning corners. The power was still on at that point, or the generator was, because the pump kicked. I filled both tanks, then 2 jerry cans I found in the back of a wrecked work truck nearby. I hated taking them. I hated leaving with other people's gear. The feeling did not matter. The North does not care about your feelings. Past Coldfoot. The isolation got real. The sky stayed gray in a way that made time slippery. I kept chewing on the same thoughts until I forced myself to focus on tasks. Fuel, temperature, road surface, tire sound, any new noise, any sign of movement in my peripheral vision. Once I saw something in the ditch, a shape half buried in snow. I slowed enough to make it out. It was a person, face down, frozen in place, one arm stretched toward the road. No blood, no visible injury, just a body that did not make it. I kept going. Stopping would not save him. Stopping could end me. Adigan Pass was the hardest stretch. The wind pushed hard enough to make the trailer tug. The grade forced my attention. I saw fresh tracks across the road at one point, uneven and dragged in places, and I did not like the angle of them. The cold up there is a tool. It slows everything down, including whatever is chasing people. It also punishes you for stepping wrong. My hands stayed on the wheel. My eyes stayed on the road. I talked to myself in a low voice to keep my mind from spiraling. Simple statements. Speed, distance, next curve. 3 weeks into the collapse, I reached the area near Prudhoe Bay with a half-broken body and a truck that had started making new sounds. A whine in the beltline. A rattle I did not recognize. The oilfield infrastructure sat there with its own logic, designed to function in harsh conditions, but I did not trust it to be staffed. I did not trust it to be empty either. People had fled north for the same reason I had, and some of those people were going to be worse than the infected. I stayed off the main service roads and followed a spur that looked neglected, snow-drifted, and uninviting. That was exactly what I wanted. I found the weather station just before the light dropped into that flat twilight that makes everything look the same. It was small, decommissioned, and half swallowed by wind-blown snow. A raised platform stood on thick posts, keeping the main cabin above the drifts. A metal storage shed sat a short distance away, and a couple of instrument masts rose from the tundra, with broken cables whipping lightly in the wind. The place looked abandoned in a way that felt honest. No fresh tire tracks, no footprints, no smoke, no lights. I parked the rig behind a low berm and shut it down. The silence hit hard. I sat there with my hand on the door handle and listened. Nothing moved except the wind and a loose strip of metal on the shed that ticked once every few seconds. That ticking became my first problem. Infected track sound. People track sound. That strip could pull something toward me from far off. I waited, counted the ticks, watched the horizon. No movement. I got out fast, crossed the snow in short, careful steps, and shoved the metal down until it stopped. The quiet after that felt safer. Getting into the cabin took a minute. The door was stiff, swollen from cold, and the latch fought me. I used a pry bar from my tool roll and kept my face turned away in case something inside was waiting. When it popped open, stale air rolled out, cold and dry. The interior was simple: a small desk, a few cabinets, a cot frame without a mattress, a corner where a heater had once been mounted. Dust that had settled into corners and frozen in place. No food, no water, no obvious supplies. I had found shelter, not comfort. I moved through the cabin in a pattern, clearing it the way I had learned to clear my trailer at night stops in sketchy areas. Check behind the door, check under the desk, check cabinets, check the small bathroom. Nothing. The only sound was my own boots and the wind pressing against the walls. I shut the door and latched it, then added my own reinforcement. A ratchet strap around the handle, a metal chair jammed under it. Not perfect, but enough to buy seconds if something tried to force entry. The first night, I did not sleep the way a person sleeps in a safe bed. I sat with my back against the wall, knees up, flare gun in my lap, and I watched the single small window. The glass was frosted around the edges, and the view was mostly gray. I ate a spoonful of peanut butter and a strip of jerky, then forced myself to drink water even though I wanted to ration it. Dehydration sneaks up on you in cold weather. I set alarms on my phone until the battery died 2 days later. Then I started using the station clock and my own sense of time. By morning, my priorities were clear: heat, water, and a way to see trouble coming. The cabin had no active power, but I found a sealed locker with some old maintenance tools and a binder of equipment notes. The station had once run on a small generator in the shed. I dug through drifted snow to reach the shed door, chipped ice off the handle, and pulled it open with both hands. Inside, the air smelled of old fuel and cold metal. The generator sat there under a tarp, dusty, with a fuel line that looked intact. I checked the oil, low but not dry. I checked the spark plug, cleaned it with a bit of cloth, and said a short, quiet sentence to nobody. Work. I siphoned diesel from my rig using a length of hose and my own patience, then fed it into the generator's tank. The first pull on the cord did nothing. The second pull coughed. The third pull caught, sputtered, then settled into a rough idle. The sound was loud in the open tundra, a hard mechanical note that could travel. I hated that. I also needed power. I let it run only long enough to charge a couple of batteries I found in the cabin and to test the station's instruments. The wind sensor spun. The barometer display flickered on. The temperature probe read a number that made me pull my hood tighter. From that day on, I lived by routine and short bursts of risk. I ran the generator twice a day, never for long, and I timed it with wind peaks because the wind carried sound away in a way that helped. I melted snow in a pot on a small camp stove I had brought, then poured it through a coffee filter to catch grit. I used the station's anemometer and pressure trends to guess when the next storm would hit, and I learned fast that guessing wrong could trap me outside. I reinforced the cabin with scavenged scrap metal from an abandoned equipment rack and used lag bolts from the shed to tighten the door frame. I built a windbreak on the exposed side using pallets and snow blocks cut with a saw. Every move made the place a little more mine. The infected showed up in small ways first. A shape on the horizon that moved wrong, slow and stubborn, cutting across wind without adjusting posture. A distant sound that might have been a shout, then nothing. Once I saw one up close near my berm, half frozen, clothes stiff, face turned into the wind as it walked. The cold had dried its skin, and its mouth kept opening and closing without any sound carrying. It did not notice me at first. I stayed still behind the rig and watched its path. It drifted toward the ticking places, toward anything that moved. When it turned its head, I saw the eyes, not dead, not alive, just present. It kept walking until it vanished behind a snow rise. I did not follow. I learned that the tundra creates a false sense of safety. You can see far, so you think you have time. Then the wind changes, the light flattens, and something can be closer than you thought. I started building simple noise traps away from the cabin. A hanging strip of metal on a stake, placed a few 100 feet out, so anything drawn by sound would drift away from my door instead of toward it. I spread out my footprint paths and brushed over them with a broom to reduce visible tracks. I stopped using bright light at night. I used red headlamp mode when I needed it, and I kept it aimed low. Week after week, the world narrowed. The radio gave me fragments, short transmissions from people who sounded exhausted, a man calling for his brother near the Yukon River, a woman asking if anyone knew if Anchorage was still taking refugees, a harsh voice warning about groups pulling vehicles off the road and stripping them. Then more silence, longer stretches, dead air. I did not hear government. I did not hear organized rescue. I heard people trying to negotiate with the end of normal life using the only tool left, a microphone. My truck became a storage box and a last resort heater. I slept in the cabin most nights, but I kept the rig ready. I ran it once a week to keep it from freezing into a useless hunk of steel. I checked belts. I tightened clamps. I patched a small leak in a coolant line with tape and prayer and a proper clamp I scavenged from the shed. I counted my food every 3 days and made myself write it down on paper, because thinking you have more than you do is how people die quietly. I went from 2 meals a day to 1 solid meal and 1 small snack. I did not treat hunger as an emergency. I treated it as a constant condition that I could manage. The first major storm hit in month 2. The pressure dropped over 12 hours, and the wind climbed until it shoved snow sideways in thick sheets. I prepped early. I filled every container with melted water. I secured loose objects. I moved the generator deeper into the shed and braced the door. When the storm arrived, it hammered the cabin in steady impacts, a constant push that made the walls creak. I sat inside with my hood up and listened to the building's joints complain. I checked the door latch every hour. I did not sleep much. When it eased after 2 days, I opened the door and found the world reshaped. Drifts had moved. My berm was half buried. My path to the shed was gone. The instrument mast nearest the cabin had snapped, leaving a jagged stump. Cleaning up after a storm is not dramatic. It is slow labor that punishes mistakes. I dug out the shed door. I cleared the cabin vents. I checked the roofline and found a seam where wind had forced snow into a gap. I sealed it with tar and scrap metal, then piled snow against it as insulation. I spent half a day just restoring my ability to move between buildings without sinking into drifts. That night, I slept longer than I had in weeks, not because I felt safe, but because exhaustion forced it. The pickup showed up in month 3. I saw it first as a dark shape crawling along the spur road, moving slow, struggling. The engine sound was rough, uneven, and the driver kept correcting the steering in small jerks. That kind of driving meant fatigue, injury, or both. I did not step out into the open. I watched through the cabin window with the flare gun and a tire iron. The pickup rolled to a stop a couple 100 feet from my berm and died. For a full minute, nobody got out. Then the driver door opened, and a man climbed out carefully, favoring one side. He wore a heavy jacket that had been stitched at the shoulder with crude thread. His hair was matted under a beanie. He raised one hand slowly to show he was empty. The passenger door opened next. A woman stepped out, smaller, bundled, face red from wind exposure. She did not wave. She scanned the area first, eyes on the horizon, then on my rig, then on the cabin. That scan told me she was not a tourist who got lost. She moved with the constant math of survival. She said something to the man, and he nodded. Then the two walked forward together, slow, leaving a clean line of tracks in the fresh snow. I stayed behind the door with it cracked just enough to see. I did not want my voice to carry too far, so I kept it low and flat. "Stop there." The man stopped. The woman stopped half a step behind him. He called back, "We are not here to take your place. We need cover and tools. The truck is dying." His voice cracked on the last word, not from emotion, from cold and strain. The woman kept her hands visible. She did not beg. She waited. I watched them long enough to see small truths. The man's gloves did not match, one thick, one thin. The woman's pack was bulging in a way that suggested medical supplies or food, not weapons. The pickup had a tarp tied over the bed with rope that looked reused, not new. If they were raiders, they were bad at it. If they were desperate, they could still be dangerous. I told myself the main rule that had kept me alive so far. Trust is not a feeling. Trust is a system. I stepped outside onto the platform, keeping distance and height, and pointed at the ground near the berm. "Drop your packs there. Step back." The man did it first. The woman hesitated, then did it. I climbed down on the far side of the berm so I was not exposed on the open flat, circled wide, and inspected the packs without touching the straps at first. I looked for wires. I looked for traps. I found protein bars, a bottle of iodine tablets, a half-empty box of bandages, and a road atlas with notes scribbled in the margins. No gun, no knife visible beyond a small utility blade. That did not mean there was nothing hidden, but it lowered the temperature in my head. I tossed the packs back toward them and kept my voice calm. "Names." The man said, "Mark Tolland." The woman said, "Lena Park." Her voice had a steady cadence, the kind you hear from someone who has dealt with emergencies before. I asked where they came from. Mark answered, "South. We tried to stay near Fairbanks. It went bad. We took the haul road because it was empty. It was not empty." He stopped there and I accepted the boundary. Nobody owes you a full story at the door. I did not let them into the cabin right away. I set them up in the shed first, with rules that came out of my mouth before doubt could soften them. No loud voices, no running engine unless I say, no open fires. If an infected shows up, do not chase it. Get behind cover and stay quiet. Lena listened and nodded once. Mark nodded too, then leaned against the shed wall, and closed his eyes for a moment in a way that showed he was close to falling over. I gave them a small pot of melted water and a couple of packs of instant noodles. It was not generosity. It was a test. If they tore into it like starving animals and then demanded more, I would have my answer. They ate slow, careful, sharing the water in measured sips. That night, I kept the cabin and let them have the shed, but I ran a line of cord with small metal tags between the two buildings so I would hear movement. It was not perfect, but it would wake me if someone tried to creep up. I slept in bursts, checking the window every time I woke. The wind stayed steady, and no new shapes appeared on the horizon. In the morning, Lena walked up alone, stopping where I had told them to stop before, and said Mark had a bad cut under his jacket that was getting angry. She asked for clean water, soap, and a place out of the wind to treat it. She did not demand. She asked in a way that left me room to say no. I made the choice based on math again. If Mark got sick and died in my shed, I would have a bigger problem. Also, a wounded man who cannot move becomes a liability for his partner, and liabilities make people do desperate things. I let them into the cabin one at a time, with Lena first, Mark second, and I kept my tools within reach. Lena worked fast, efficient. She cleaned the wound with boiled water and iodine, cut away dead fabric, and rewrapped it. She did not waste supplies. She did not talk much. When she was done, she looked at my shelves and the way I had organized things, then looked at me. "You have a system," she said. "Keep it. We can fit into it." Over the next week, I watched for the moment they would break the rules. It did not happen. Mark fixed a loose hinge on the shed door without being asked, using his own bolts. Lena helped me dig a new snow pit for water storage and showed me a better way to layer insulation around the containers so they would not freeze solid. They did not act grateful in an annoying way. They acted focused. That earned more than sweet talk ever could. Still, I did not hand them control. I assigned tasks. I timed generator runs. I controlled the radio. If someone wanted to go outside the perimeter, that person told me first. The first real conflict came when Mark asked about my fuel stash. Not in a sneaky way, in a practical way. "The pickup can run," he said. "Not far, but it can run. We should keep it ready." I told him fuel was the difference between surviving a storm and freezing during repairs. He said he understood, then pointed out that staying put forever meant living on dwindling supplies. "There are storage yards out there," he said, nodding toward the oil field roads. "There is equipment. There are heaters. There is food somewhere, even if it is just old rations." Lena did not jump in. She watched my face and waited. I did not like the idea of leaving. I had built this place into something stable. Stability is rare during collapse, and people get stupid around rare things. But the logic was hard to deny. I could not grow food here. I could not hunt easily without burning energy and taking risk. The station was a good hide, not a forever home. The answer was to move only when the weather gave permission and only with a plan that did not depend on luck. I told them yes, but on my schedule with my rules. Mark nodded, relief flashing quick across his face. Lena nodded once, no emotion. We used the instruments properly after that. Each morning I checked pressure trends and wind direction. Each evening I wrote down what changed. Mark handled mechanical checks. He drained old fuel, checked hoses, patched a cracked line with a piece of rubber and a clamp. Lena inventoried medical supplies and reorganized them by actual use cases, not by packaging. We packed 3 go bags each. We set a hard rule. If someone got separated in low visibility, that person did not run and did not yell. That person dropped low, stayed still, and used a whistle only if there was no other option. Sound travels too far out here. Sound is a beacon. The weather window came on a morning where the wind eased and the sky cleared enough to make distance readable again. The cold was still brutal, but calm weather is its own gift. We left with the pickup first, keeping my rig as fallback. Mark drove. Lena sat passenger with a simple map of service roads. I sat in the bed under the tarp, watching our back trail, scanning for movement. It was not comfortable. Comfort is not a factor. We moved slow to keep the engine from stressing, and we avoided any area that looked recently disturbed. The first storage yard we approached looked abandoned from a distance. No smoke, no lights, no movement. Up close, we saw the problem. Tracks. Not just tire tracks. Footprints. Multiple sets, overlapping, circling, going in and out of containers. Mark shut the engine off early and coasted behind a snow berm. None of us spoke. Lina's eyes tracked the prints with quick precision. My gaze went to the corners and gaps where a person could hide. We waited a full 5 minutes, letting the silence settle. Then we heard it, faint but unmistakable, a metallic clatter from inside the yard. Someone was moving equipment. Someone was alive. We backed away without discussion. A living person in a storage yard had resources and motive. That person might be reasonable. That person might also be the kind of person who survives by taking. We had no reason to gamble. We drove farther, following a side road that led toward a smaller site with fewer structures, something that looked forgotten. The pickup engine coughed twice on the way, and Mark kept his hands steady on the wheel, pretending it did not matter. It mattered. At the smaller site, we found an equipment shelter with a half-collapsed door. Inside were stacked crates, old weathered packaging, and a locked cabinet bolted to the wall. The place smelled of cold metal and old oil. No fresh footprints, no signs of recent use. We moved fast, because even empty places can become busy fast. Mark worked the cabinet lock with tools. Lina stood watch outside, back to the wall, eyes scanning the horizon. I pulled crates toward the pickup and opened them enough to confirm contents. Heater fuel canisters, a box of chemical hand warmers, a small case of shelf-stable rations with labels faded but intact. Not a treasure, but real value. The infected arrived while we were loading, not a swarm. 2. They approached from downwind, their movements stiff, slow, and persistent. Lena saw them first and did not yell. She tapped the pickup bed twice, sharp, then pointed. Mark froze, then looked, then reached for the driver door. I held up my hand. Running engines draw attention. Doors slamming draw attention. We did not need speed. We needed quiet. I picked up a length of metal pipe from the shelter floor and walked out at an angle, keeping distance, positioning myself between the infected and the pickup. I did not rush them. I did not swing wild. I used the pipe to knock a hanging metal panel loose from the shelter roof and let it drop hard onto the snow 20 yards away, out from our path. The sound cracked across the empty space. The infected turned toward it immediately and started trudging that direction, heads twitching, bodies following noise more than sight. Lena and Mark watched me, reading the trick. I pointed at the pickup without speaking and made a slow wave motion. Move, quiet. We loaded the last crate and rolled out with the engine starting in a controlled way. No sudden rev. The infected wandered toward the fallen panel and stayed there, pawing at it, shifting weight, stuck in a loop of simple stimulus. We left them behind without drama. My hands shook only in the sense that cold makes hands stiff. I kept them steady anyway. When we got back to the station, I did not celebrate. I simply added the rations to the inventory and marked the date. Winter deepened. The days stayed short. The wind stayed constant. The station became a working unit with 3 people operating it. Mark improved the generator setup, adding a better muffling barrier that reduced the sound a little. Lena created a basic sanitation corner and a wound care station, forcing us to keep things cleaner than my lone survival mode ever would have. I kept the perimeter and the schedule. We rotated night watch in 2-hour blocks, not because we expected an attack every night, but because fatigue makes people sloppy, and sloppy gets punished out here. The second time we saw other living people, it was from a distance. A line of headlights far off on the main service road, moving slow, then stopping, then turning around. We watched from the cabin window with the lights off. Nobody drove out this far for fun. That was a group searching, scouting, or fleeing. Either way, I did not want them noticing our little island of shelter. Mark wanted to watch longer. Lena wanted to pull the blackout covers tighter and keep quiet. I sided with Lena. Curiosity is expensive. Our next problem was food math. The extra rations helped, but the consumption rate increased with 3 bodies working, digging, hauling, repairing. Cold burns calories without asking. We started planning for hunting small game and birds when possible, but the tundra near the station offered little, and wasting energy on long hunts could turn into an injury, then a slow disaster. Mark suggested one more run, farther this time toward a facility that might have a bigger cache. Lena insisted we do it only after a storm, because fresh snow would erase old tracks and reduce the chance of someone following us. That was good thinking. I added another rule. If we saw any sign of a human camp, we left. No debate. The storm came and went, and the world reset again under a clean layer of snow. We went out at first calm light. This time I drove. Mark rode in back with tools. Lena navigated. We reached a maintenance building with a fenced yard and a small tower. The fence was half buried, but intact enough to slow movement. There were no footprints. The doors were locked. That was good. Locked doors mean fewer people had been inside. Mark worked the lock without smashing it, slow and patient. Breaking things is easy. Fixing broken things is hard. Inside, we found what felt almost obscene. Heat packs, batteries, a case of canned stew, a small propane heater with fuel canisters, a bundle of blankets sealed in plastic. It was not endless, but it was a real buffer. We did not get greedy. We took what we could carry, left the rest stacked and organized, and shut the door behind us. That mattered. If we had to come back, we wanted the place to still function. On the way out, Lena found a small first aid cabinet and replenished what we had used on Mark's wound. Mark found a set of spare belts that matched my rig. I felt my shoulders loosen in a way I did not allow myself to notice often. Coming back to the station that night, we changed the shape of our plan. This was no longer a man hiding from the world. This was a small, disciplined unit building a life in a place nobody wanted. I still did not trust the world. I still did not trust strangers. But I trusted the system we were building because it was based on repeatable behavior, not hopes. Mark respected boundaries. Lena respected reality. I respected both of them more than I expected to. Month by month, we turned the station into a quiet fortress. We added a second windbreak wall and improved insulation using scavenged foam panels. We built a better snow melt setup that reduced fuel usage. We reinforced the shed so it could serve as a fallback shelter if the cabin door failed. We created a simple signal plan for each other. 1 tap means attention, 2 taps means freeze, 3 taps means move now. We did not shout across open tundra. We did not waste light. We did not let routine become laziness. The infected remained a background threat, present enough to stay sharp. Sometimes one wandered near, slowed by cold, clothes frozen to skin, still moving because whatever drove it did not care about pain. We never engaged unless forced. We diverted them with sound traps, used distance, used wind. Once, one got close enough to slap at the cabin steps, drawn by a loose cable that was tapping the platform. Mark killed the cable sound by pinning it down from the inside, using a bolt through a gap in the wall. No hero moves, just problem solving. The infected stayed at the base of the steps for a while, then drifted away when the stimulus stopped. We talked sometimes, but not in long, emotional speeches. The conversations were short and functional, usually while hands were busy. Mark told me he had worked electrical on the slope before everything fell apart. Lena told me she had been a paramedic out of Anchorage, then got trapped when the routes broke and the rumors turned into mobs. I told them I had picked north because it was empty. I did not confess every hard decision I made on the road. Nobody needed that. The Tundra does not reward confession. It rewards competence. One night, we caught a radio transmission that changed how we saw the future. A clear voice, not panicked, stating that no organized evacuation was coming to the far north, and that any remaining personnel in remote stations should shelter in place and avoid contact. The message repeated twice, then ended. It could have been real. It could have been someone playing at authority. The effect was the same. We had already chosen shelter in place. The message just confirmed that we were on our own by design, not by accident. After that, we stopped looking outward for hope. We looked outward only for threats and opportunities. We planned for spring thaw, when movement becomes easier and the infected might become more active. We planned for the day other survivors might push north harder, either to escape crowds or to hunt for remote supplies. We rehearsed what we would do if a group showed up at our door. No pleading, no bargaining at the threshold. We would observe, we would decide, and we would act with discipline. I was honest with Mark and Lena. If a large group tried to force entry, we would abandon the station and disappear into the empty miles while their noise drew infected toward them. Nobody argued. Nobody pretended that was cruel. It was simply the rule of survival out here. The first time I laughed in months was stupid. Mark tried to cook stew on the small heater and forgot that the cabin air was too dry, too thin of moisture, and he scorched the pot in a way that made the entire place smell for hours. Lena called him an idiot in a tired, flat tone, not harsh, and he accepted it without offense. I laughed once, quick, then stopped and listened for the sound of anything outside. Nothing. The silence held. The moment passed. It was a small reminder that being alive is not only fear and work, even when fear and work run the schedule. Spring did not arrive with comfort. It arrived with melt, with wet snow that clung to boots, with ice that turned into slick layers over everything. We adjusted. We moved slower. We kept dry gear ready. We checked each other for signs of frostbite and infection, and Lena kept a strict rule about wound care. Mark's shoulder cut healed into a thick scar. My hands developed cracks that needed ointment. We rationed that too. Every tiny resource became part of the system. The biggest change came when the daylight stretched. Longer visibility means longer windows for movement, but it also means more chance of being seen. We used the longer days to do one more major supply run, this time with both vehicles. My rig was loud and obvious, but it could carry more and it could serve as a barricade. We drove with the pickup scouting ahead, staying off main routes, avoiding anything that looked lived in. We found a small cache of weather station spares at another decommissioned site and hauled back sensors, cable, and a spare battery bank. Not because we cared about science anymore, but because working instruments meant better warning. Better warning meant fewer surprises. By the time we hit month 6 at the station, the place felt less abandoned and more claimed. The tundra still stretched endless in every direction. The wind still did not stop. The infected still wandered, slow and stubborn. But inside the cabin, we had order. We had a routine that did not depend on wishful thinking. We had a plan for storms, a plan for injury, a plan for unwanted visitors. If any rescue existed, it was not aimed at us. That truth stopped hurting after a while. It became another piece of data. I think about the first day in Fairbanks sometimes, sitting in that jam, watching people shout and run. Back then, the idea of driving north felt wrong in a moral way, as if I was abandoning everyone. Now I see it clearly. I did not abandon the world. The world broke, and I chose the only direction that reduced contact with its worst parts. That choice bought me time. Time bought me shelter. Shelter bought me the chance to make careful decisions instead of desperate ones. Tonight, I am on the platform with my hood up, watching the horizon through thin, drifting snow. Mark is inside checking the generator. Lena is writing inventory notes at the desk with a pencil that is worn down to a stub. The instruments hum softly when the power runs, and the wind keeps pressing against the walls with steady pressure. Nothing out there promises safety. The station does not promise safety either. It promises a fighting chance, and that is the most honest promise I have heard since the collapse started.